Hi, Quay, Melita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian, and today I'll be talking about my March wrap-up. Yes, I am wearing my overalls from the last video. The days I film tend to be the days that I want to wear my overalls, okay? So we're gonna briefly go over that, and now moving on. Okay, March. I don't know what happened with March. I feel like it took forever. Like there were moments where I don't know. It was so weird. And I say this because I read so many books this month, and let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Yeah, it was real odd. I had a strange reading month, in all honesty. So I read 13 books in March, which is like great, fantastic. I do want to say though that please don't compare yourself to others. The only one you can appease is you. Just because I read 13 doesn't mean that I'm necessarily better or worse than anybody else. The same with yourself. If you were able to read 1 to 500 books in a month, then fantastic. We all read at our own pace. And likewise, like if I happen to love a book you hated or vice versa, it makes the world go around because that's our opinions. It's nothing against you. It's nothing against me. Let's all just get along. Okay. But yeah, I read 13 books. I don't know, it got to the point where towards the end of the month, I'm just like, I can read, I can not read, like I don't really, I'm pretty good. I'm good where I'm at. So let's go over the stats real quick. So 13 books in the month of March. For pages read, that is 3,464. Hours listened, 54.98. Please note that I do keep track of all the pages, even if I've listened to them, but don't necessarily keep track of the hours of everything. It's usually just the audiobooks, so I don't know, I just prefer it. Let's see. Sources, I have had 6 audiobooks and 7 physical, which is okay. Format type, I have 4 graphic novels, 1 novel, and 1 novella. Audience, 8 adult, 1 children's, 2 middle grade, and 2 YA. Rating breakdown, I have 0 1 star, 0 2 star, 1 2 2.5 stars, 4 3 stars, 1 4 star, 1 4.5 star, and 4 5 stars. Giving it the average for the month 3.79. And then in terms of genres, I have 1 contemporary, 5 fantasy, which is like, what? Who am I right now? 2 horror, 1 mystery, 2 nonfiction, 1 paranormal, and 1 sci-fi. Yeah, it was quite the month, let me just tell you. First book I read for the month of March was Hide and Seeker by Daka Herman. This is a middle grade horror, and we're following Justin, who believes there's something wrong with his friend. His friend, what's his name? Z went missing over a year ago, and now he's back, and something's not right. Here, let me just read you the thing. Justin knows that something is wrong with his best friend. Z went missing for a year, and when he came back, he was different. Nobody knows what happened to him. At Z's welcome home party, Justin and the neighborhood crew play hide and seek, but it goes wrong, very wrong. One by one, everyone who plays the game disappears, pulled into a world of nightmares that come to life. Justin and his friends realize this horrible place is where Z had been trapped. All they can do now is hide from the seeker. I thought it was relatively scary. I also think it was fairly fast-paced. It was a really easy read, but ultimately I can't say it was all that memorable. Though at the same time it was at the beginning of this year. This was actually one that I had on my February TBR, and I think I had started reading it just at the end of February, and it kind of just rolled over into March. So I don't think I'll be keeping this physical copy, but I am glad that I read it. Like, it was overall entertaining, but it didn't like strike any particular chord with me. So It does go over some sensitive topics of grief and loss, particularly with Justin because he did lose his mom. Yeah. I don't know. I think too the ending was just kind of a little unsatisfying. So I don't know. It was interesting though. So this next one did complete a Pokemon card, and that was for little Leo. And I had chosen, so for little Leo, it's a fire Pokemon. It was to read a book that everyone was talking about. And for this, I had picked the very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. This was completely adorable. I ended up listening to this through my library, and had basically, once I got to a certain point, I'm like, I need this book physically, and like went into my local bookstore and had them order it for me. So we are following Micah Moon, who is a witch in Britain, and there's like a group of witches that meet up on the third month of every 3 months of the year, and but they don't meet up very often. It is against the rules to hang out with other witches because they don't want everyone to know about them or about their magic. Bad things happen. So to cover up that she is a witch, Micah has a YouTube channel where she pretends to be a witch. Some people end up finding her YouTube channel and end up asking her to come and tutor 3 orphan children. They have suspicion that she's an actual witch, and these 3 children particularly need a witchy tutor. So this was, and of course, like it's kind of like this found family. There's a groundskeeper, a housekeeper, a cranky librarian, a mysterious archivist or archaeologist, and 3 children who are all adopted, who are coming into their powers. And Mika is kind of thrown into this and trying to figure out, like, she's never done anything like this before. This goes against all the rules that she knew growing up. But she feels like a need to be able to do this. So this is ultimately to a romance, because of course the cranky librarian and Mika, who's this bubbly witch, end up falling for each other. So this was completely and utterly adorable, and my only complaint is that I'm not the biggest fan of the illustration of the people. I would have been fine without that, but otherwise the narration style was also very cute. Let me figure out who the narrator was for this book. This was illustrated by Samara McLaren, and they did a wonderful job. This was a very cute read. I absolutely loved the narration style. There were elements in I was really particularly nervous when it came to the 3 little girls, because I thought for sure I wouldn't be able to tell like who was speaking, but Samara does an excellent job in making each voice very distinguishable. Yeah, it was ultimately really cute. I love this. I gave this 5 stars. Yeah, this also worked for the buzzword for the month, which was secret, so that works great. But yeah, like I cannot get over this book. It's completely and utterly adorable. The next book that I read was for Lotad, so that was completed as well. This is a water Pokemon, so it's to read a book that features or has water on the cover. And for Lotad, I ended up reading How Far the Light Reaches, A Life in 10 Sea Creatures by Sabrina Imbler. So I'll put the photo here. I'll adjust. There we go. And it's also narrated by Sabrina Imbler. This was a very interesting nonfiction. It kind of gave me elements of like how to be a good creature of sorts. So Sabrina Imbler is a mixed, non-binary human, but they are also like a scientific journalist, and they kind of go through their life of how these 10 different sea creatures and how they related to them. I actually kind of forgot that I read this book this year, so I didn't rate this because it's a nonfiction, but basically Sabrina Imbler ends up talking about some of the discrimination that facing as a mixed Asian American, and as well as some of the discrimination that they faced as they were figuring out their sexuality, as well as their pronouns, figuring out their gender. So ultimately, it was really interesting. There was some definitely heavy topics in here, sexual assault being very prevalent, so I would definitely look up some content warnings if you're at all interested in this, but ultimately I thought it was a very impactful read, and I love this cover. Okay, so Steel was originally, so for energy cards, I typically, whatever the element is that's on the card is the color that I have to find on the cover of a book, and this originally was going to be Frankenstein. I just wasn't feeling it, so I didn't end up reading it, and so I switched it for another nonfiction, and that is Tremors in the Blood, Murder, Obsession, and the Birth of the Lie Detector by Amit Katwala, narrated by Paul Bellantoni, which was a great narration style. I thought it was a really interesting nonfiction. This is it's historical nonfiction, but it's also like a bit of true crime, because ultimately we are following multiple crimes as well as some scientific endeavor as they're figuring out the lie detector, and how to create it and how to best utilize it. So we go through a couple of people who end up helping in terms of creating the lie detector, and how basically the police have and public attention has put way too much attention on actually figuring out if it's a truly lie detector. There was so many problems with it. So I thought it was a really interesting read. I flew through it. Did I rate this? I don't think I did, because it's another nonfiction. Oh, okay. So I was gonna say, because I don't rate nonfiction books that are like biographies or anything like that, or memoirs, but this one I did rate at a 4.5. She keeps moving. Yeah, I rated it at a 4.5. I thought it was very interesting. I do want a physical copy of it. Yeah, because I think it's interesting. Yeah, but that's all I really had to say about it. Definitely look at content warnings though, because there is some graphic depictions of injury, death, etc. Okay, so for Hypno, which is a thriller or a psychic Pokemon, I was to read a thriller, and for that I picked the Literally Dead book club pick for the month of February, and that was The Spite House by Johnny Compton. This is following a what's his name, Eric Ross, who is basically on the run, but we're not sure from what, with his two daughters, 18-year-old Dessa, and 6-year-old, I forget his younger daughter's name, but they're on the run. We're not entirely sure from what, and we know that they're escaping East United States, going into the southern sections, and he ends up stumbling across a want ad in a newspaper that there is a house in Texas that someone wants, this known haunted house in Texas. They want someone to live in it and basically transcribe anything that happens within the house. So Eric Ross takes his daughters and goes to meet the owner, and she agrees that he would be the best person to live in this haunted house. It is called the Spite House. It's the reason it's called that is because it was a house made from spite, and we kind of learn the history of the Spite House, as well as more of the history of Eric Ross and his daughters and why they're on the run. It's interesting. It was definitely, it was spooky. It wasn't as spooky as I had wanted it to be, in all honesty. There were elements in, within the house, it was pretty spooky. You could not pay me to live in the house. And actually, there was little bits that I read out loud to my partner. He's like, no, absolutely not. You could not pay me enough. So, so ultimately, that's why Eric Ross does this, particularly with his daughters, is because it will help them make a new life for themselves. And were definitely spooky elements, but ultimately it just didn't thrill me as much as I wanted it to. I'm very interested in seeing literally did book club live show to figure out how others felt about this, because ultimately I found it a little underwhelming. But ultimately thought it was interesting, so I gave it 3 stars. I probably won't be keeping this physical copy. I'll probably end up donating it to my library. So, okay, so I think after this White House, I started reading, listening to a nonfiction. I was also reading and like physically reading a nonfiction, and I kind of just got nonfiction burnout. And so I like paused both of them and was just seeking other things. Like I just wasn't feeling either of them. So I ended up going with Advanced Listener's copy that I got from Libro, and that is Against the Current by Olivia Matthews, narrated by Janina Edwards. This, we are following a young woman who, it was her dream since she was a kid to open a bakery with her family. And her family is from, I don't know if it's Trinidad. I can't quite remember, but it definitely has these like Caribbean elements to it, and like what makes her feel like home. And they end up she gets her dream. She ends up going through college, getting a business degree, and convinces her parents to go in with her on creating this bakery. And she's really excited for it, but there's been a bit of a kerfuffle with another bakery in the neighborhood. And it's the owner keeps telling her to not open the bakery, that he will have her shut down. But when he ends up coming on like opening day to her bakery and starts drilling into her again and not taking her seriously as one of the owners of the bakery, they end up having a big argument in front of everybody. She stands up for not only herself but her family, because he says some pretty shit things. And he's escorted out by his son, but only the next day the police end up showing up at the bakery because the owner of the bakery that she had an argument with is dead, and she's the main suspect. So it's this like cozy mystery type deal. Ultimately it was interesting, and I thought that the main character had a lot of growth throughout it. But ultimately I don't know how I feel really about like amateur sleuths like doing the work. Like I understood it. Like she made this argument throughout the whole book in terms of the police were looking at her, that she was their main suspect, despite everyone else believing that she couldn't do it. Like everyone in that neighborhood knows her. They grew up with her, and they would not believe that she would do this. However, it was starting to hurt their business. So she felt that it was upon herself to go and look into this, what actually happened. And I don't know, like I get it, but I just I don't personally like it. So it was fine. What did I end up giving this? It was ultimately fine, and ultimately the recipes sounded really good. I rated this 2.5. Like I said, it was just kind of like the whole time. But it was a relatively quick read. It was one of those ones that as I was listening to it, like, and kept debating on DNF it, I'm like, oh, I only have like 2 hours left. I might as well just finish it. So it wasn't bad. It's just like I'm finding that maybe I'm just not a cozy mystery girly. So because that's ultimately how I felt about like Arsenic and Adobo as well. It's just like, but why? Which makes me sad, because I do have another book that I would like to get to that is basically the same thing, but it's with like, what's it called? Oh, it's like Death and Dumplings by Vivian Chen. And that's another one I would like to get to, but I have a feeling that I'm just not going to like it. But the cover is so pretty. So next was for Flappy. This is a reverse hollow Flappy. So that is an electric Pokemon. And for electric, it's to read a quick read. And because it's reverse hollow, it's to read a backlist quick read. And for that, I ended up picking up The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt. Written by Riel Nason and illustrated by Byron Eggenschwiller. I apologize. That's probably not how you say that. But this was a really cute children's book, and basically we are following a ghost who was a quilt. All the other ghosts are made out of sheets. They are light and airy, and they can do twirls and fly and whatever. But because this particular ghost is a quilt, he's heavy and he gets hot when trying to spin and fly. So, but he wants to be able to participate and like be scary and be a typical ghost during Halloween, and finding that he can't do that while he's a quilt. I don't know why I'm giving the little ghost he pronouns. Yeah, that's what, I mean, the book does, so I couldn't remember if it specified. So, and it's basically just like, just because you're different doesn't mean that, I mean, it just means that you're going to have a different experience. Doesn't mean it's going to be a bad experience. I mean, for the most part, it doesn't mean it's going to be a bad experience, but it offers some new perspectives, really, and that's what I really enjoyed about this book. It was super cute. So yeah, I gave it 5 stars. Yeah, that was basically all I'll say about it without spoiling it. So let's see. So I was still continuing on with my like nonfiction reading slump, so I ended up picking out another advanced listeners copy that I got from Libro FM, and that was Big Swiss by Jen Began, narrated by Rebecca Lohman, Carlotta Brenton, Stephen Graybill, Joy Ozamonski, and Matt Pittenger. So I was unsure about this book. I think was it a March ALC, or I think it was a February ALC. So I was unsure about it, but then I had heard that, I can't remember their name, I'm sorry. Someone, I remember a booktuber ended up talking about it. I can't remember who at the moment. I can picture their YouTube and I can picture their face. I will leave that here. But they ended up talking about it and saying it was really funny. So I decided to listen to it. Ultimately, we are following, I already forgot her name, main character names slips my mind. Greta. We are following Greta, who lives with her friend Sabine in an ancient Dutch farmhouse in Hudson, New York. She has recently become a transcriber for a sex therapist who wants to be able to transcribe his sessions with his patients because he's doing he's writing a book. So, or doing a study. I think he's writing a book. So, Greta is there's particular sessions that Greta listens in on to be able to transcribe with a woman that she doesn't know the name of. She just knows the initials, but she ends up calling this woman Big Swiss. And she's oddly really attracted to this person despite never seeing them, only hearing their voice. But then one day when she's at the dog park with her dog, when Greta's at the park with her dog, an incident ends up happening and she ends up coming face to face with Big Swiss. And kind of ends up making a lie on the spot because she doesn't know how else to like broach the whole thing of like, oh, I know you because I transcribe your sex therapy sessions. So she ends up lying, and based off this lie ends up becoming friends and ultimately intimate partners with Big Swiss. And ultimately, like, I thought this was going to be funnier. So the beginning of this is relatively funny. We end up listening to a lot of the sex therapy sessions. And ultimately, the sex therapist himself is a little odd. He's a little eccentric. He focuses on some odd things. But it's relatively funny, and it makes the sex therapy sessions kind of funny. There was, like, definitely moments where I laughed out loud. That wasn't... It didn't happen throughout the whole book. Not only just the sex therapy sessions, but like I didn't expect to listen to the sex therapy sessions like all throughout the book, but like just these funny moments, they weren't there the whole time. So Greta herself is like 50 years old, I believe, and Big Swiss turns out to be like 26, and Greta's housemate Sabine is like in her late 50s, early 60s or something like that. I don't know. It's like, and it's all quirky, but it almost like feels forced quirky and like, oh look, isn't this hilarious? Look what they're doing. And it's like, there's moments where it's like, okay, yeah, it actually kind of is. And then there's moments where I'm like, no, this is turned a little odd for me. There was, and it was just really odd too, this mix of like trying to be funny, but at the same time, there was definite content warnings in terms of Greta's has suicidal tendencies. Well, not suicidal, suicidal ideation. She ends up talking about not wanting to live very much, and that's something that ends up getting broached between her and Big Swiss at some point, where ultimately, like, she doesn't plan for anything because ultimately she could ultimately one day decide that she doesn't want to be here. So it was a real weird, like, this is a serious topic, but we're gonna mesh it with some like haha funny moments. And it was odd for me, just because to me suicide is a pretty huge topic, conversation. So by the end of it, I was just kind of going, what the hell is going on? So I gave it 2 stars. I don't know, maybe it was just because I was expecting it to be funny throughout the whole thing. I don't know. I'm not sure what I was expecting from it, really. I do love this cover. I think it's hilarious. And I think it's like it has like some good expression. I really enjoy it. But ultimately, the book itself was just kind of meh. I'm not sure where it was going. I feel like it didn't know where it was going, really. So 2 stars. The next 4 books I ended up reading for my 23 of 2023 part 1 vlog, which I'm not sure if it's going to be out before this one or after. I have to think about that. But ultimately, I was playing catch up and order, just because it took a while for me to. I didn't film it till February, I didn't edit it till March, and I didn't upload it until March. So I just wanted to play catch up. And so because I was in this nonfiction slump, I was kind of like, okay, well, and like I had a lot of these come in through Interlibrary Lounge, I decided to go ahead and make a vlog out of it. So you'll hear my thoughts on them more. So I may end up just like, I'll direct you to that, but ultimately I'll go through it quickly here. The first one I read was Prime Meridian by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Next, I ended up reading Grimoire Noir by Vera Green Tea and Yana Bogach. I then read The Moth Keeper. This was a pre-order for me by Kay O'Neill. And then I also, the last one that I read for that particular vlog was Tales from the Inner City by Sean Tan. And then finally, the last book that I read for March was actually the first in a series that it was real weird. I was still in like this nonfiction reading slump, and for some reason had this inkling to really want to read fantasy. I ended up picking up His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. So this is the first book in the Temeraire series. This is like a historical fiction fantasy. It's during the Napoleonic Wars. We are following William Lawrence, who is the captain of one of Britain's ships. Like he's part of the Navy, and they end up fighting with and capturing a French frigate. And on this ship, they find a dragon egg that is like days within hatching. They bring it aboard, and the rule is that once the dragon hatches, you have to be able to harness it. That way it's not feral. And basically whoever harnesses it is then the dragon's keeper of sorts. So, of course, like, the Navy, okay, so like dragon riding's more for the Air Force type deal, right? And so the Navy and the Air Force don't always get along. So there's this like trepidation of wanting, like no one really necessarily wants to do this. Plus like they haven't actually seen dragons, they've heard of them, and there's like this reputation that dragon riders have. So none of these sailors necessarily want to do this. And lo and behold, when the dragon hatches, Captain Lawrence ends up having to harness it. So now he's transferring into the Air Force of sorts, or and training to go against Napoleon Bonaparte and France's dragon riders. It's really fun. This was actually recommended to me by a coworker who left recently, a coworker and friend that left recently last year. And I swear they could not stop talking about this. And I'm always hesitant to go into books that someone keeps recommending me, just because it takes me so long to get into them. But as soon as I started listening to this, so like this was narrated by Simon Vance, and I love his narration style, I have to say. I love his voices for all the characters. Yes, the dragons talk. They are at different levels of intelligence because each culture has like basically like there's dragons all over the world. Each region has their own culture in terms of training dragons, and it's just really fun. I'm really excited about it. I was like chatting with my friend the whole time as I was reading it, going, oh my god, are you kidding me? And they're like, right. And so like they're excited that I'm reading it, and also excited that I'm excited to get into it. So this is like a complete shocker to me, because I don't typically go near fantasy like as much as I would like to, because I feel like I would ultimately really love fantasy. I always feel like they're intimidating because I feel like they're gonna go right over my head, that I'm not gonna be smart enough for them. But His Majesty's Dragon, I absolutely loved. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm like, despite this being a 9-book series, I'm so excited to get into it. It also doesn't help either that these covers are illustrated by Rubina Kai. If you don't remember, is also the illustrator for Elotsoe by Darcy Littlebadger. I believe she also did a couple of book covers for Patrick Ness. So absolutely love these covers. And so I basically, as soon as I finished book 1, I'm just like, I need to order these. So yeah, absolutely love it. I cannot wait for the next one. And I believe, if you don't know, I do have the next one on my April TBR. So I can't wait to get to it. So I didn't go through all of my Pokemon cards. My apologies. Let me see which ones I still have left and what I did for them. So for ESQ, it was to read Coast Range, and I didn't get to it, obviously. So that, like, I finished talking to you about the books that I read for the month. Wasn't able to get to this. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I just hit a nonfiction reading slump, so I'm still hoping to get to this at some point. It's just gonna go back on the pile. Next was Bagon, which I put in. Was originally supposed to be The Keeper of Night. I didn't lose the dust jacket. It just fell behind one of these shelves, so I don't have it with me currently. I did start this, but ultimately wasn't feeling it, so I put it down for the time being. I will still hopefully get it on another TBR shortly, but ultimately for Bagon, I switched out The Keeper of Night for His Majesty's Dragon. So technically I completed this. It's just not what I had said originally was going to be on it. So yeah, ultimately that means I didn't read any book of the month this month. So that's another month that I didn't do that. So for Talonflame, I believe I had Abalone. Didn't read it. I'm blaming the nonfiction slump. Again, I would still love to get to this at some point. Back on the pile. Sorry. So that was actually for Teddy Ursa. Okay, so Teddy Ursa was a contemporary, and that was supposed to be Abalone. That I switched out for Big Swiss. Talonflame was supposed to be for An Immense World, which is a nonfiction, and I think it was also supposed to work with Abalone, and or An Immense World was also supposed to work with the Aurelium Adventure challenge that G has put out for the year, and the prompt that I was on was to defeat the wizard, which was ultimately to read a book that had over a 4.33 average rating on Goodreads, which Abalone would have worked for, or Big Swiss. Not Big Swiss, An Immense World, sorry. I don't think any of the books I read completed that challenge. No, none of them did. We have a couple of 4.23s, but like no book that I read for the month of March completed the challenge of reading something with an average rating over 4.33. So like I said, it was supposed to be An Immense World or Abalone, and I didn't get to either one of them. So Talonflame, was supposed to be An Immense World, didn't get to it. I did start reading it, so I just put it on pause right now because nonfiction slump. Lil Pup was supposed to be Fuzz, which I do have. It's in my room actually, so I'm still actually reading it, but it was another one that I had started reading it and put it on pause because it was too much nonfiction for 1 month. So I just kind of went with my gut and just put it on pause. I do still hope to finish both of them at some point. We'll just have to see when. And then I have this full face guard, which is a trainer card, which is a mood read, which could literally be any of the ones that I did not have originally on my TBR. So I think ultimately, I think what I put in it was Prime Meridian, since it was the start of my 23 of 2023 for the vlog. So yeah. All right, so that is what I read for the month of March. If you've read any of them, let me know what your thoughts were down in the comments down below. If you've made it this far, let's go ahead and put some kind of astrological emoji in the comments down below. So planet, stars, moon, whatever your favorite one is. This one's mine. I kind of like giving you an open emoji place. So yeah, otherwise I hope that you remember to like if you have yet to do so already, subscribe if you want to see more of me, and I hope that you're in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I'll see you in another video very soon. Shoo.